Okay, grab a drink, pull up a chair, and let's get right into this explainer. Because honestly, the story we're looking at today feels like it was ripped straight out of a late-night Hollywood script. We're talking about the ultimate mastermind's ascent. It is a pure, unfiltered, rags-to-riches saga of absolute epic proportions. Today, we're breaking down exactly how a village schoolteacher's son managed to build one of the biggest corporate behemoths on the planet.
Right off the bat, I want to hit you with a number. 2 crore rupees. Just let that sink in for a second. That is roughly what Reliance Industries earns every single minute right now. Not every year, not every day. We are talking every 60 seconds. I mean, it's a level of wealth that is almost impossible for a normal person to wrap their head around, right?
But wait, let me get this straight, because I really want you to think about this massive contrast. Today, Reliance is a 2 crore a minute empire. But Dhirubhai Ambani's journey, it didn't start in some air-conditioned boardroom. It actually began with him working as an ordinary clerk in Aden, literally standing out in the blazing desert sun for hours on end, physically pumping petrol into cars. How on earth do you go from holding a gas nozzle in the desert to holding the reins of India's most powerful corporate empire?
Well, it all starts back in 1932, in a tiny village called Chorwad in Gujarat. Dhirubhai was born into a family of 7, and they were all crammed into this tiny 2-room house. His dad was a highly respected school teacher, but look, the salary just wasn't enough to feed everyone. But here's the thing you have to understand about him. This extreme poverty didn't break him. Instead, it fueled this completely unmatched relentless hunger. By the time he was just 16 years old, with literally zero family money and no connections, he just boards a steamer and sails 2,400 kilometers to the Arabian countries, just hoping to find a way to make it.
And man, it did not take long for a sheer genius to show. Wow, this part is actually wild. So, it's the 1950s in Aden, and he notices something about the local currency, the Yemeni rial. It was made of solid silver. He suddenly realizes that the actual silver inside the coin is worth more than the face value of the coin itself. So, check out this strategy. Step 1, he'd buy a rial for the equivalent of 10 British pounds. Step 2, literally melt the coin down. Step 3, sell those silver ingots to London bullion dealers for 12 pounds. That is a direct £2 profit every single time. Pure arbitrage. The sheer audacity of it. He made lakhs doing this before the authorities finally caught on and shut the whole thing down.
That early hustle, it perfectly captured exactly who this guy was. His very first interviewer in Aden, a guy named Mangal Bhai Patel, probably said it best. He said, his footsteps were heavy, he walked as if he had somewhere to reach and very little time. He just had this intense, almost frantic urgency about him. So by 1958, after grinding for 10 years in Aden, a 26-year-old Dhirubhai knew it was time to build his own empire. He heads back to Bombay and starts a business in a tiny 350-square-foot room. We're talking 1 table, 3 chairs, and a single telephone.
Now, his first massive breakthrough back in India is just fascinating. At the time, domestic production for synthetic threads like nylon and polyester was way short of demand, and the government heavily restricted imports. But the government handed out these things called REP, or replenishment licenses, which gave exporters the right to import a small percentage of those artificial threads. Dhirubhai notices that a lot of these exporters weren't even bothering to use their licenses. So what does he do? He quietly swoops in, buys up all these unused licenses at premium prices, and effectively corners the entire Indian synthetic thread import market right under everyone's noses.
Okay, but here is where his ruthless brilliance really shines. He was in business at the time with his cousin Champaklal, who was, let's say, a very cautious guy. In 1965, Dhirubhai aggressively hoarded this huge thread inventory, predicting the market prices would rise. Champaklal completely panicked and forced him to sell it all off to avoid risk. So, what did Dhirubhai actually do? He sold it to himself, completely in secret. When the prices inevitably skyrocketed just a few weeks later, he made an absolute fortune, offered his totally stunned partner a share of it, and that essentially forced him out by telling him not to interfere in a business he clearly didn't understand.
Once he had full control, he pivoted, and he pivoted hard. He didn't just want to supply the thread anymore, he wanted to actually manufacture the textiles himself. He sets up a factory in Naroda with just 4 knitting machines and launches his very own brand, Vimal. He brilliantly positioned it as this premium fabric for the mass market using that iconic "Only Vimal" tagline. He dropped an absolutely unheard of 1 crore rupees annually on advertising and built this sprawling Western-style franchise model with 400 shops. By 1979, that tiny 4-machine factory, it was a 25 lakh square foot behemoth, and Reliance had become India's largest textile producer.
But here's the catch. To keep growing at that insane pace, he needed capital. A lot of it. And in 1977, he single-handedly revolutionized the Indian stock market. Before this, IPOs were basically just a private playground for a few wealthy families and huge financial institutions. Dhirubhai just bypassed them entirely. He priced Reliance shares at just 10 rupees, effectively making the everyday Indian middle class his direct partners. The IPO was oversubscribed 7 times over, and within months, that stock shot up to 50 rupees, generating incredible life-changing wealth for the general public.
Okay, this next part builds into an absolute financial thriller. So it's 1982, and a Calcutta-based bear cartel decides they are going to attack Reliance stock. Their playbook was pretty simple. Short selling. Borrow a ton of shares, dump them on the open market to trigger a massive panic, crash the price, and then buy those shares back dirt cheap to return to the original lenders, pocketing a huge difference. Within just half an hour, they dumped 3.5 lakh shares onto the market.
And it worked. At first, the price dropped from 131 to 121 rupees. But then, an absolute wild card enters the game. This mysterious group of West Asian NRI buyers steps in out of nowhere and just starts absorbing every single share the bears are dumping. They bought and they completely neutralized the attack. By April 30th, instead of crashing, the stock skyrocketed to 201 rupees. The bears were completely trapped and financially ruined. And the crazy twist? Those mysterious buyers were allegedly backed by Dhirubhai himself. He literally masterminded a squeeze on his own attackers.
Now, looking neutrally at the sources, it is very clear there are two sides to this coin. Operating in India's licensed Raj era absolutely required intense political maneuvering. So while Dhirubhai was widely celebrated as a true visionary, he was also a fierce, unrelenting corporate warrior. The sources detail some legendary rivalries, like his battles with Bombay Dyeing's Newsly Wadia and the media baron Ramnath Goenka. These involved intense tactics, things like allegedly blocking government licenses, delaying customs, and engaging in massive media campaigns. It really was an era of cutthroat corporate warfare, and he was right at the center of it.
But you know, that immense, non-stop pressure, those endless battles, they eventually took a devastating toll. In 1986, the unstoppable force suddenly just stopped. Dhirubhai suffered a massive stroke. He was rushed to the U.S., literally fighting between life and death for weeks. For a moment, the entire business world just held its breath, genuinely thinking the era of Dhirubhai Ambani was over.
But listen, you can never, ever count a mastermind out. When he returned to India months later, the right side of his body was completely paralyzed. It was incredibly difficult for him to even walk. But as the source material so beautifully puts it, the stroke may have slowed his body, but his mind was still sharp. The fire was absolutely still there. In fact, he came back with his most audacious, impossible dream yet.
He came back hyper-focused on his ultimate vision, which was backward integration. See, up until now, Reliance bought polyester threads from other people to make their Vimal textiles. Dhirubhai wanted to own the entire chain. So, step by step, he moved backwards. He started making the polyester threads himself. But threads require chemicals, right? So he built huge petrochemical plants. But petrochemicals require refined crude oil. So, the ultimate endgame? Building his very own massive crude oil refinery. But nature threw a massive curveball. Just as they were expanding their gigantic petrochemical plant at Patalganga, a devastating monsoon cloudburst flooded the entire valley. Hundreds of crores worth of incredibly complex machinery were completely submerged underwater. I mean, how do you even recover from that? Well, his son Mukesh Ambani stepped up, took charge, brought in a literal army of workers, and they dismantled, cleaned, and reassembled every single machine. They amazingly had the submerged plant running again in just 1 month. Just incredible. Unbelievable resilience.
With that massive hurdle cleared, in 1993, Dhirubhai finally announced the last piece of the puzzle, the Jamnagar oil refinery. At the time, this was going to be India's very first private sector oil refinery and the largest private industrial investment in the country's entire history. The cost? A staggering $6 billion.
So, the really crucial point here is how this move completely locked down his empire. Completed in a record 3 years and fully operational by 2000, this mega refinery was processing 25% of India's total crude oil. It sold 75% of its output to external customers, generating massive revenue, and the remaining 25%? It was consumed internally by Reliance to feed their own chemical and textile plants.
His dream of backward integration was flawlessly, perfectly realized.
And there is this really poetic, larger-than-life conclusion to his story. Because the Jamnagar refinery was built in a harsh, unforgiving desert, Dhirubhai had over 100,000 mango trees planted all around it, actually breaking a historical record set centuries ago by the Mughal Emperor Akbar. In his final shareholder address in April 2002, he looked back on his days pumping gas in Aden, saying his boyhood dream was to build a global energy company for India. He passed away just a few months later, knowing he had done exactly that. He left us with this truly incredible philosophy. Our dreams must be bigger, our ambitions higher, our commitment deeper, and our efforts greater. That was the relentless, unstoppable mindset that allowed a village school teacher's son, standing in the scorching heat with a gas nozzle, to build India's greatest company. It really leaves you thinking, doesn't it? Look, we might not be building $6 billion oil refineries in the desert anytime soon, but the underlying strategy remains exactly the same. So I'll leave you with this thought. If you were to apply Dhirubhai's genius concept of backward integration to your own life, your own projects, or your career, what is the very first link in the chain that you would take control of today? Think about it. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you next time.